Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Behind the Curtain. Today we're talking about team goals. Are team goals really a good thing, or can they be a detriment to how the team performs? One of the chapters in my book is about management by objectives. This was something Dr. Deming talked a lot about. And it's basically, is that a good way to drive certain behaviors by having objectives that, people are managed to, or is it a detriment to the success of the overall enterprise? So we're here today to talk about that. And I'm going to let my co-host here start us off. So Mohamed, what are your thoughts about team goals?
That's such a hard discussion to do in our short little podcast, but I'll try to get to the heart of it. Is what do we mean by team goals? And so one of the things, at least when I work with organizations, and I'm not talking about like Kaizen teams here, I'm talking about departments with a leader and teams. There are two types of goals that I try to kind of bring awareness to. There's sometimes what we call the true north goal, which is in my book at least called distal goals. Those are the distant ones that we want to reach. And then there's proxy goals, which are more like milestone goals. And I think for teams and team effectiveness, proxy goals are critical because people need to know if they're winning or losing, and they need to know that they're making progress. What I have found with organizations that said we're setting goals, they'll set goals, and I'll just make it up for a second just to kind of give an example for the audience, is sometimes we'll talk about hospital-acquired infections, for example. They'll say, we're at the 35 or 40%, which is horrible. And, our distal goal is 60%. So that's the long-term goal. So for me, that's a bad goal. Okay, because and in that case, I would tell you it's better not to have a goal at all, because that distal goal, what happens if your team achieves it? Do they just stop improving? And so I would say distal goals should be your ideal goals, and the goals that you can't push any further. So hospital-acquired infection, what's your distal goal? It should be zero. Zero
Right.
patients should come in and get a infection that they didn't sign up for when they checked in.
Just to reiterate that, I totally 100% agree that like in the manufacturing world, first pass yield should be 100%. That should be your distal goal or your true north goal, right? And to set anything less than that, it's basically sending a signal to your organization that it's okay to send bad stuff to your customers, right? Or it's okay to have bad quality. No. It's 100%. Now, one of the arguments against that is that, well, what about diminishing returns? What if you get to 99%? Are you really going to work to get that last 1%? And it's like, yes, there are plenty of companies out there that have achieved 6 Sigma levels of quality, which is, 3 parts per million defect rate, or 99.9997%. So it is doable. It is achievable. So so you just got to keep working at it. And anytime, and to your point about if you set that too low, I had one organization recently that said that they were at 85% and they set the goal, the distal goal, the true north goal at 90%. Well, they had worked really hard that year and got to 92% about halfway through the year and said, okay, we don't need to work on quality anymore for the rest of the year. We're done. We met our distal goal. We even exceeded it by 2%. So man, look how great we are. Pat ourselves on the back. We're, let's celebrate. And it's like, you're not done. You still could, and maybe if you'd kept that momentum going, maybe you could have gotten to 94, 96, 98% by the end of the year. But because the goal was 90, they shifted all those resources elsewhere. And then by the end of the year, they had dropped back to 85%. See how that works?
Yeah.
So I'm in total agreement with you on that one.
Yeah. And you said something that I think I just want to go back to that I think it's really important is for teams, and I see this problem happen a lot, at least in healthcare, it's very popular, is sometimes your distal goal will be like 100% quality. Like, do zero harm. Like that,
Right.
that is our motto. And but that will also be the team goal. And it's not realistic for the team in 1 year to go from a 40% to 100%. And it becomes this unrealistic goal that often leads to burnout. And sometimes even employee well-being starts to deteriorate.
Right.
And so like I'll tell organizations, like, you need to have the highest ambitious distal goal, which is usually like 100% or zero harm or zero falls or whatever that is. But you have to make your proxy goals realistic.
Right.
You have to give them like I sometimes use the word proxy goals, and sometimes I'll use milestones, but you need to give them proxy milestones or proxy goals throughout their journey, so that they know, hey, in 1 year, let's try to get a 20% improvement or cut our quality issues by 50% or something like that. We still have to get to zero quality issues, but let's have like a 1, 2, 3 year projection of how we're going to reach this
So
goal.
what I like to call those proxy goals that you're saying is I like to call them celebration points.
Yeah.
Right. Let's define some celebration points along our journey to 100%.
Yeah.
So to your point, so if we're at 85, let's set a celebration point at 90.
Yeah.
And then when we achieve that, we need to do something grand. We need to have a big catered meal for lunch for everybody, or we need to have, a celebration on the weekend where we invite the families in and have a big cookout in our parking lot, something to really make sure every employee understands how great of an achievement that was. And it wasn't just the team, the whole organization needs to celebrate that. And then you say, okay, before we end that celebration, you announce what the next celebration point is going to be.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to have the next celebration is when we get to 93%.
Yeah.
We're going to have another celebration. And I'll tell you, people will watch those metrics very carefully, very closely. And it'll be like, how close are we to getting to 90%, 93%? When is our next celebration? Now you also have to have, this is really important when we're talking about metrics in general. It's also important to have a culture that understands the importance of being honest with these metrics, right? Because the last thing you'd want to happen is for people to start fudging the data in order to hit those proxy goals, if you will, or the celebration points. All of a sudden they start hiding the defects, or if it's a safety issue, safety goal, then they start not reporting injuries when in fact they should be. Yep. So that's a critical part of anything dealing with metrics and tracking progress.
Yeah, I think you bring up I hope our audience paid attention to this part, because I think that is such an important aspect, because we see it a lot, like people not reporting things to make their numbers look good just so that they could hit the number, which brings me to like an overarching theme of sometimes we are have overemphasis on certain metrics, that it starts to drive the wrong behaviors. And when we start looking at those wrong behaviors, sometimes we're so short-term focused now that we're not looking at the long-term effects of some of these things, and we get new information along the journey that requires us to pivot. But we don't listen to it because we have a number we have to hit. And even though, like, we have to get X amount out of the door, so we're trying to focus on that. Yes, but these things are going to come back as rejects. Who cares? So, like, sometimes we'll try to length of stay. Let's shorten length of stay. But yeah, but your readmissions are going back up because people are leaving too early, and now they're going to be readmitted back to the hospital. But you're thinking of that short-term goal that you want to hit that. So understanding the integrity of the metrics, the culture that you're creating around those metrics, and also the consequences of short-term outcomes that could probably drive or have an impact on other metrics as well.
So in fact, and this is something that really blows people's minds, when you're first starting a continuous improvement journey, you may actually discover that many of the metrics go backwards, right? Because now you're being more honest, you're being more, complete in your catching of the issues, and that should be celebrated, because you're now being honest with yourselves. And it's kind of like in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The first steps to Alcoholic Anonymous to overcome addiction is to admit that you're an alcoholic. Same thing here. The first step for making improvement happen is to admit that you need to improve. And if your metrics have been showing up this whole time at 98, 99%, and everybody agrees that it's total garbage, total baloney, and then all of a sudden you start forming your teams and you start digging into the data, and you start to realize that, oh my goodness, we're not at 98, 99%. We're at 78% at best. Well, that should be celebrated, because now you have achieved that next level of understanding of where we are. And that's when you can start making improvement happen. Now, the tough part of that's going to be, how do you communicate that to the executives, right? If all of a sudden, for years they've been seeing 98, 99%, and then all of a sudden they see this massive, step function drop to 78%. The first thing they're going to do is get on the phone and call the leader and be like, what the heck's going on? How did you let this happen? And it's like, no, we've always been at 78%. We're just now being honest about it. So the executives, how they respond to that will be very telling. If they understand and be like, oh, okay, well, that's great, because that means now we can do something about it, then fine. But if they start going, off the deep end and start really, yelling at this leader, guess what? The next time they report it, it'll be at 99% again.
Or sometimes they even let that person go.
Right. Or let that person go when all they were doing was being honest about what's really going on.
I think that's a really good point. You made me think of something that I think is also important when we set team goals, is that, back to the term culture that you used, what was the design principle behind setting these goals? If the design principle is to create a team over self environment versus a self over team environment, then you need to understand, is this goal going to create competition or collaboration? And if it's going to create competition, then you have to really focus on how to create shared goals. So you might have multiple teams, and I see this a lot, where they'll have for like a primary care office, for a receptionist, they'll have the goal of reducing no-shows. So they have to call the patients in advance to remind them to make sure they show up, and here's what they need, and that usually reduces no-shows. And but your medical assistants who also talk to the patients to tell them about their labs or things they have to do beforehand, and your nurses and your physician have to have the same message and the same goal. Because, the physician could be like, last time you didn't come, you no-showed, or last time we had an appointment, you no-showed, and there's a lot of consequences to that. And so having like departmental goals that are not shared among the team, and you see it on executives too. HR has a goal, but IT doesn't have that goal. Well, then you need to find a way to make them all have that shared goal so that they could collaborate when one person is not hitting their goal, but the others are hitting their proxy goal, that they jump in as a team and collaborate and try to make that person successful versus compete to see which one's going to look better in front of the CEO.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I don't think enough organizations do that. In fact, let's talk about the competition for just a moment.
Mhm.
I've had a lot of people tell me that, oh, we have healthy competition here. So let's just say that you have a first shift team and a second shift team, and you now are pitting them against each other. Basically, because that's what competition is, right? Is you got winners and losers. One team's going to win, the other team's going to lose. And if they understand that, guess what's going to happen? Because I've seen this happen many, many times actually. Is what'll happen is the first shift, towards the end of the shift, they'll drain the lines of all the product. So second shift doesn't have anything to start with, which means they're right off the bat, their metrics are going to be awful.
Yeah.
And then they can say, see, we're better than you all because see, we're winning.
Yeah.
And then second shift will have to reciprocate, right? So they'll turn off all the equipment and unplug everything. So when the first shift comes in, nothing is warmed up, nothing is ready to go. So they have to spend the first half hour getting all the equipment ready to go. And they lose that productivity. And it starts to, sabotage is real.
Yeah.
If you think you're in competition where there's winners and losers.
Yeah.
Same for functions like you're talking about. I remember, one of the most frustrating ones in manufacturing is when purchasing has its own set of metrics that are counter to the success of the overall business. So like if purchasing has a metric to go reduce their prices on bought parts, no matter what the total cost is. So in other words, I could find the worst possible supplier. Their delivery is awful. Their quality is awful, but man, they're selling it to us at a really good price. Well, if all I'm being measured on in purchasing is price reduction and not all the consequences of those decisions, then I'll look like a hero and manufacturing will look horrible.
Of course.
Because now all of a sudden they're dealing with late parts that are awful quality, and guess who's going to ultimately suffer is the customer. And then over time the business is going to go out of business because customers can't stand them. So every function needs to have their metrics aligned and needs to understand the ramifications of what those goals are going to drive.
Yeah. One other thing that I think is important too, as you were saying that I think our audience needs to be aware of, and I see it a lot in healthcare, and it's probably relevant to every industry, is I'll see a manager at, say, a primary care office level, and I'll ask them, what's your proxy goal? They're like, well, we have 22 of them.
Right.
And so that lack of focus with a layer of lack of clarity, you see managers and general managers of sites and GMs across all industries. They have so many proxy goals because that one distal goal has like 5 proxy goals. And rather than focus on one proxy goal and hit it as a team, you're trying to focus on all 5, but then there's another one. So you have a lot of distal now because each one on the top wants to look good, with many proxy ones underneath it that all funnel down on this one person in that one office that crumbles them. And so, we'll talk about like what's one of the main reasons for burnout for leaders and managers. Well, it's because you have too many proxy goals. And we'll say, you know what, you don't need 22. Let's just focus on your top 4. And like, there's no way I'll get fired if I only focus on 4. And so, I'm not saying take things off the radar from a performance standpoint. You need to understand your performance on a holistic level. But if you're trying to move the needle, too many metrics has horrible consequences on the team.
And then one last point, because we're about out of time. How many goals are set on process improvement or culture improvement instead of outcome improvement? Correct. Right? I tell you, the Masters was on just recently, and when they were interviewing the golfer who won the Masters, he said something that actually pertains to what we're talking about. He said that he doesn't focus on the next shot. He focuses on the process of swinging the club, and he knows that as long as he follows that process, he'll get a good shot. So he's not focused on outcomes. Yep. He's focused on improving the process of swinging the club. Mm-hmm. So same kind of thing here, right? And saying, okay, customer satisfaction, instead of focusing on that as a metric, what if the metric was how well we build up camaraderie within the nursing team, mm-hmm. right? Or how well are we at hitting the checklist that we have for turning a room over? How often are we hitting all of the key checkpoints for turning that room over? Knowing that if we do those things well, the metrics will improve.
I love what you just said, because like even in that, there's layers. So like we'll have, on the front line, they'll be measuring patient satisfaction. I'm like, that's too high. That's too high of a level metric. Like, and I'm not talking about distal and proxy, because even in those layers, there's distal and proxy. And like, all right, well, one of the main reasons is because we get patient complaints. Still too high level for me. I want to understand what kind of patient complaints you get. Well, what's your number one patient complaint? Well, we get cold food on the floor. Gotcha. So what's the process of getting warm food? Let's focus on that process. That should be your focus. And in that, there's a distal and a proxy. But when you have patient satisfaction as your metric that you're measuring each day, well, that's not going to move. And it's going to demotivate the team. And the team is going to feel like this is just a waste of time, these huddles, because we can't really make a dent on that. But you can make a dent on how many trays yesterday showed up to patients' rooms that were warm. By asking the patients, did you get your warm food today or not?
And again, as long as we understand that that's going to require some sort of process change. Yeah. Because the worst thing to do is say, oh, we're not getting warm food to the patients, so let's just try harder. Yeah. No, it's what needs to change in the process to make that happen. All right. Well, hey, this was a great discussion, and we'll pick up next week. So I hope you can join us.
Take care, everyone.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.